In a quiet corner of Texas, there's a town that's been hiding a secret for years. A secret that's far more terrifying than anything the residents could ever explain. People talk in whispers, and the stories go untold, until now. What happens when the truth is buried so deep that even the town itself is afraid to confront it? This is a true story of what happens when darkness doesn't just linger. It grows, waiting for someone to uncover it. But some things are better left untouched. It was a warm summer evening in Amarillo, Texas, a town that many would call peaceful. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where the streets are quiet, and life feels like it's moving at a slower pace. The sun, heavy in the sky, cast long shadows across the cracked roads, and the air hung thick with the scent of dust and sagebrush. At first glance, Amarillo seemed like any other small town. The kind of place where people went about their business, and their biggest worry was the weather. But beneath that peaceful exterior, there was an undercurrent, one that the people of Amarillo knew well, but rarely spoke of. They said it was a place full of ghosts, not just from the past, but from something far older, something that had been there long before the town itself. And while the locals might chuckle at the thought of it, there were things in Amarillo that you didn't dare question. You could feel it in the air, especially when the wind picked up late in the afternoon, when it swept across the endless plains, carrying with it an odd sense of foreboding. The town square, lined with old brick buildings and a large, iron-framed clock, was where most of the town gathered. And if you listened closely, you'd hear the stories, the whispers about the old farmhouse at the edge of town, the one no one dared to enter. Some people said the house was built on cursed land. Others spoke of the strange figure that wandered near the graveyard at night. But no matter who you asked, you would always get the same answer. You don't go there. Not at night. And yet, for all its mystery, Amarillo was a place where secrets didn't stay buried for long. It was a town where, eventually, everything would come to light. Even if it took years, even if it took a tragedy. But sometimes, there are things better left in the dark. Because some truths, once uncovered, have the power to change everything. As the days passed, life in Amarillo continued on its familiar path, the rhythms of everyday life carrying people from dawn to dusk. But in the quiet of the night, something was changing. It wasn't noticeable at first, a creak in the floorboards, a flicker of light in the windows of the old farmhouse. But soon, even the most skeptical residents of Amarillo couldn't deny that something was wrong. It began with small occurrences. Late-night phone calls that didn't have anyone on the other end. The sound of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. The sound was always the same, slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking just behind you. But when you turned around, no one was there. At first, the town shrugged it off. People dismissed it as the normal quirks of a house that had stood empty for so long. But that changed when the first person went missing. A local teenager, one of the few adventurous souls who had ever dared approach the old farmhouse, disappeared one evening. He had been out for a walk, nothing unusual about it, but when the sun set, he didn't come home. His friends searched for him for hours, calling out his name. But the only response was the howling wind and the whisper of the tall grass in the fields. The next morning, his bicycle was found just outside the farmhouse. It was still standing upright, as if he had just parked it there. But when the authorities arrived, they found no trace of him. Not a footprint, not a sign of struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The police chalked it up to the teenager running away, a simple case of rebellion. But the people of Amarillo knew better. The town's silence grew thicker, as if the very land was holding its breath. Something had happened that no one could explain. And though no one dared say it aloud, everyone knew one thing for sure. The farmhouse wasn't just a house. It was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting for years, maybe longer, for someone to find its secrets. The farmhouse itself seemed to loom over the town, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The once whitewashed walls were now stained with age and neglect, the windows cracked and covered in grime. But there was something else, something that became clearer the more you looked. Every window seemed to have a dim light flickering inside, no matter the hour. The once pristine yard was overrun with thick, tangled weeds, their dark, twisted roots creeping up to the doorstep. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of decaying rooms. The wooden floors groaned underfoot, the air thick with the smell of mildew and dust. But there was a feeling in the house, something that couldn't be explained. It was a sense that the walls were breathing, alive with the presence of something unseen. Every room seemed to have its own pulse, its own energy, waiting to be disturbed. The deeper into the house you ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, the silence more suffocating. Every shadow seemed to twitch with movement, like something was always just out of sight. No one dared go past the front hall. No one dared to go upstairs. But it was the cellar that caught the attention of the curious. No one had seen the cellar door in years. The house had been locked up tight for decades, and yet, that night, it creaked open. Slowly, reluctantly, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. And those who had dared to enter never returned the same. They would talk about the door that opened itself, the strange symbols carved into the walls, and the unexplainable chill that seemed to follow them back. But no one could say what happened in that cellar. No one could speak of what they saw. They would only say one thing before they left: stay away. It's not just the house, it's the land. In Amarillo, there's a saying that's been passed down for generations. The land remembers. It's a strange saying, but it carries a heavy weight. Locals talk of a curse, an ancient presence that lingers in the soil. Some say it dates back to the settlers, others believe it's tied to the land itself, something much older than the town itself, tied to the earth in ways no one fully understands. They tell stories of the first families who tried to settle here, how they would wake in the night to the sound of whispers in their ears, a low murmur that seemed to be coming from beneath the ground. They say the ground here isn't just dirt and rock, it's something darker, something that was once alive. One of the oldest stories involves the house at the edge of town, the one the locals call the House of the Hollow. They say it was built by a man who was obsessed with the occult, who believed that by binding his soul to the land, he could live forever. And he did, but in a way that no one expected. The house, they say, is a prison for his restless spirit. But as with all prisons, it's only a matter of time before someone finds a way to set them free. And when they do, the curse will spread. The spirits of the land, the lost souls who roam the earth, will come back for what they are owed. Days passed, and the story of the missing teenager faded into the background, but the whispers didn't stop. People started to stay away from the old farmhouse, some locking their doors earlier than usual, some even leaving the town altogether. But one night, a group of young men, curious and defiant, decided to confront the rumors head-on. Armed with flashlights and the bravado of youth, they approached the farmhouse. It was an unspoken challenge, a dare to uncover the truth behind the stories. They entered the house, their voices echoing in the vast, empty space, their footsteps loud against the floorboards. But as they moved deeper into the house, something changed. The air became heavy, like a weight pressing down on their chests. The door to the cellar was open. It hadn't been before. As they descended the stairs, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just cold, it was a cold that seemed to seep into their bones. The farther they went, the darker it became, until even their flashlights seemed useless, swallowed by the blackness. And then at the bottom they saw it, a door they hadn't noticed before, old and rusted, as if it had been hidden for years. One of the men reached for the door, his hand trembling. As soon as his fingers touched the cold metal, the floor beneath them rumbled. A low growl, like thunder from below, filled the room. It shook the walls, rattled the foundation, and then came the sound of chains scraping against stone, dragging across the floor. Before anyone could react, the door opened by itself. And there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a man, but not a man. His eyes glowed in the dark, hollow and empty. His lips twisted into a grin, and his voice, when it came, was low and rasping. "Welcome home," he whispered. "You've come just in time." As the man stepped into the light, the air thickened, growing colder with each breath. The group stood frozen, their flashlights trembling in their hands, casting frantic shadows on the walls. The figure before them was a tall, gaunt man, his skin pale and stretched tightly over his bones. His eyes, however, were what struck the most terror into their hearts. Empty, hollow, and yet, somehow, they gleamed with a knowing, ancient hunger. His lips parted into a twisted grin as he beckoned them closer. "You found it," he rasped. His voice was like gravel scraping against stone, the words slithering into their minds like poison. They hadn't expected this. No one had. The stories of ghosts, of the cursed house, those were tales to keep the curious away, but this was something worse. This was real. "You've disturbed it," the figure continued. "The curse, it's not just the house. It's the land. You didn't just come here to explore. You came to set it free." The group looked around, confusion and fear mixing in their eyes. How could this man, this thing, know what they had come for? They hadn't told anyone their plans to enter the house. No one knew. And then it hit them. This wasn't just any ghost. This was the man who had lived here, the man whose spirit was said to haunt the land. the one who had tied himself to the earth in some dark, twisted ritual, ensuring his soul would never leave. But as the figure stepped closer, the truth became even more chilling. His body was not completely human. Parts of him flickered, like the very essence of his form was unstable, as though he was slipping between worlds. It was like watching a living nightmare, a being who existed between the living and the dead. And that's when they saw it. The floor beneath them was shifting. The wooden planks creaked and groaned as if something beneath was pressing upward, something heavy, ancient, and unrelenting. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the cellar, rising in pitch until it became a deafening roar. The ground cracked open, and from the darkness, something massive emerged. It wasn't a body. It wasn't even human. A creature, twisted and contorted, crawled from the earth. It had the shape of a man, but its skin was translucent, writhing with shadows, its limbs long and disproportionate, stretching and pulling in ways that defied the natural order. This was the curse. This was the true horror of the land. The creature had been bound here for centuries, trapped beneath the house, but now it was free. The man, still standing there with that grotesque smile on his face, whispered, "The land remembers." His eyes flickered briefly, and for a moment, the man's form seemed to vanish, leaving only the creature in his place. The air became thick with an oppressive darkness. The creature's eyes burned red as it focused on the group, a horrific grin forming on its face, much like the man's. The room, the house, it seemed to come alive with the sound of something scraping, shifting, as though the entire structure was waking from a deep slumber. The young men turned to run, but the floor gave way beneath them. They tumbled into the depths, their screams swallowed by the dark abyss as the creature rose higher, its grotesque form towering over them. And then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The ground closed up as if nothing had ever happened. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the first rays of dawn touched the land, there were whispers in the wind, carried across Amarillo. The house, now abandoned once again, was silent, but the shadows inside told a different story. The curse was not broken. It had simply waited, and it would wait again for someone else to come too close. Someone else to uncover what should have stayed hidden forever. Because once the land calls to you, you can never escape. It remembers. What do you think really happened that night in the farmhouse? Was it the restless spirit of the man, or was the creature from the depths truly set free? Could the land itself have been waiting all these years for someone to uncover its dark secret? Let me know what you believe happened in the comments below. Don't be afraid to share your theories. It was a typical Texas evening when Sarah and her family first noticed something strange. A small town, nestled somewhere far from the big cities, so peaceful that you could hear the crickets on a quiet night. A place where everyone knew everyone's business. A town where stories were shared over barbecues, and no one thought anything ever went bump in the night. But things began to change. It started off small, an odd sound here, a cold draft there, but soon, the strange events escalated. The Jones family had lived in the same house for years. It was old, but it was home. The kind of house that creaked and groaned with age. Nothing unusual. At least, that's what they thought. It was during one sweltering summer evening that the first real sign of something unsettling emerged. Sarah, the youngest of the family, had always been the imaginative one. But this time, she wasn't imagining things. No, what she experienced was far too real to dismiss as a child's imagination. At first, Sarah's family brushed off the small things, whispers in the wind, the sound of a door creaking open at night even though they were sure it had been shut. But it was more than that. There were shadows, odd shadows that seemed to take on lives of their own. It was subtle at first, just fleeting, like something from the corner of your eye that disappears when you turn your head. But then it got worse. One evening, Sarah was alone in her room, reading a book by the window, when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps echoing in the hallway outside her door. Her heart pounded as she rose to open it, but when she did, the hall was empty. Nothing but the faint flicker of the dim hallway light casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. She closed the door and tried to calm herself. Surely it was just the house settling, right? But then the whispers started. They weren't loud, just soft, barely noticeable at first. But Sarah heard them clear as day. A voice, faint and distant, calling her name. Sarah. It wasn't her parents. It wasn't anyone she knew. And yet it seemed familiar. Every night, the whispers grew louder. At times, they felt like they were right next to her. At other times, they seemed far away, hidden somewhere deep within the walls of the house. The house had always been old, but it wasn't until the whispers began that Sarah began to realize this house wasn't just old. It was haunted. The family tried to convince themselves that it was nothing, just strange occurrences, maybe even the wind playing tricks on them. But Sarah knew better. As each night passed, the strange events began to build, like a storm gathering in the distance. The once welcoming house felt colder, darker, and when Sarah's little brother, Mark, started having nightmares, things took a darker turn. He would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming about the thing in the shadows. But there was nothing there, or so they thought. One evening, as Sarah and her mother were cleaning out the attic, they stumbled upon an old trunk, one that had been locked for as long as they could remember. It had never been opened. Curiosity pushed them to investigate, and inside they found something that no one had expected. Old family journals, pages yellowed with age, detailing the history of the house and the land it sat on. As Sarah's mother flipped through the pages, she stumbled upon a passage that caught her breath. It was a letter, written by an ancestor who once lived in the house. It described a strange curse that had plagued the family for generations. A curse tied to the land itself, and one that had never been broken. The letter spoke of a family member who had been warned about the thing that lurked in the house, a malevolent force that followed the bloodline of Sarah's ancestors. But the curse didn't end there. The letter also spoke of a pact, one that would forever tie Sarah's family to the house and the darkness within it. It wasn't a haunting. It was a curse passed down like a legacy, and that legacy was now calling for Sarah. It was that very night when the truth hit home. Sarah had known the whispers, the shadows, and the footsteps. But what came next was something no one could have prepared for. It started with a knock on the door, a sound that reverberated through the house, heavy and deliberate. No one was outside. No one was ever outside. The knock was just the beginning. As Sarah stood in the hallway, she felt a sudden chill, a bone-deep cold that made her skin crawl. It wasn't the air, it was something else, something darker. Then came the footsteps, louder this time, as if whatever was out there was getting closer. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she slowly walked toward the sound. She turned a corner and froze. The hallway light flickered, and for a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw her reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't her. It was something else. Its eyes were black, hollow pits. The face was twisted, distorted, not a reflection at all, but a monstrous figure standing in the mirror. Sarah backed away in horror, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. And then it spoke, a voice twisted and cold. "You're next, Sarah. You belong to us." Sarah fled the house that night. She had to. She couldn't stay there any longer. But as she stepped out into the night, she could feel the weight of the curse following her, tugging at her every step. It wasn't just the house, it was something more. Something far older. Wherever she went, it followed. She could still hear the whispers, feel the cold grip on her shoulder, and see the reflection of those hollow eyes every time she looked in a mirror. It was as if the darkness had seeped into her very soul. Years have passed since that night, and Sarah has moved far away from the house. But she still feels it. That presence. It's out there waiting. It's watching. And sometimes in the dead of night, she still hears those whispers, soft, almost gentle, but carrying a warning. The curse is never truly broken. It's always there, lingering, waiting for the right moment to strike again. It was a humid summer night in the small town of Pine Hollow, a place so quiet, you could hear the breeze rustling through the trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, the heat from the day still lingering in the atmosphere, making it feel as if the town itself was holding its breath. As the sun dipped behind the sprawling Texas hills, the sky bled into shades of deep red and orange, casting long shadows over the landscape. It was the kind of night where you could feel something was off, a heaviness in the air that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise. At the edge of town stood the old Holloway house. Its once proud frame now sagged, the porch crooked and splintered. The windows, some cracked and others entirely gone, stared blankly into the darkness, as if the house itself were trying to avoid seeing what lurked in the night. It had been abandoned for years, but there was something about it, something unsettling. The neighbors avoided the house, walking by quickly, eyes averted, as if they feared the house could see into their souls. The town, small and close-knit, had long whispered about the place, but no one had dared to go near it, not for years. And yet, tonight, something had changed. The wind shifted, carrying with it a strange chill that cut through the sticky heat of the evening. A lone figure walked towards the house, their footsteps creaking on the rotting wood of the porch. They paused at the door, looking back once at the dark street before stepping inside. The first few days in the Holloway house were quiet. The new tenants, the Collins family, Amanda, a young mother, her husband, Tom, and their 10-year-old son, Lucas, had hoped for a fresh start. Pine Hollow seemed like the perfect place to escape the noise and chaos of the city. But the house, with its peeling walls and creaky floors, had a way of making you feel like you were never truly alone. At first, it was nothing more than the usual sounds you'd expect in an old house. The floorboards groaning underfoot, the occasional rattle of a window in the wind. But then came the whispers. Low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift through the house at night. Amanda, exhausted from unpacking, chalked it up to her imagination, until one night, she woke to hear a voice in the dark calling her name softly. Amanda, Amanda. It wasn't Tom. It wasn't Lucas. The voice came from somewhere deeper in the house, from the shadows. The door to the attic had always been locked, but one evening, Amanda noticed it was slightly ajar. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she approached, but curiosity got the better of her. When she pushed it open, the faint smell of something rotten hit her, a mixture of mold and decay lingering in the stale air. But there was nothing there, no sign of disturbance. Just the same old dust. That night, Lucas woke up screaming from his bed, his small frame trembling with fear. "Mom, I saw someone." They were standing in the corner, in the dark. But when Amanda rushed to his side, the room was empty, except for the faintest imprint of wet footprints on the floor, leading from the closet to the bed. The house seemed to grow colder as the days wore on. In the middle of summer, Amanda found herself bundled in a blanket, shivering uncontrollably. A chill, unnatural, that crept along the walls, making her teeth chatter. And every night, the noises grew louder. Soft scratching sounds behind the walls, like nails scraping against wood, echoed through the house in the dead of night. At first, they thought it was the pipes or maybe rats, but there was something wrong. Something wasn't right, and they all felt it now. And then, one evening, Tom swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the yard, a shadow moving just beyond the light of the porch. But when he stepped outside to investigate, there was nothing. No one, just the stillness of the night. But the feeling that something or someone was watching never left. One evening, in the dead of night, the noises grew unbearable. The scraping behind the walls became louder, more insistent, like something or someone was trying to break through. Tom, unable to ignore it any longer, grabbed a crowbar and began prying at the wall in the hallway, where the sound seemed to be the strongest. The air felt thick with tension as he chipped away at the old plaster, each crack in the wall reverberating through the house like a heartbeat. When the hole was finally large enough, the stench hit them, overpowering, sickening. The smell of decay, the kind that clung to the back of your throat and made your stomach turn. It was as if something had been trapped there for years. Tom pulled back, his face pale, but it was Amanda who stepped forward. Against her better judgment, she peered into the hole. And then she saw it, something that would haunt her forever. A small, yellowed hand, stiffened with time, was visible within the wall. A chill ran down her spine as she realized what she was looking at. The wall was hollow. Behind it, wedged into a small, confined space, was the lifeless body of a woman. The body was barely recognizable, her skin desiccated, the eyes wide open, staring with a fixed, hollow expression. But it wasn't just the woman that made Amanda's blood run cold. It was the way her body was positioned, angled unnaturally, as if she had been placed there intentionally. And her clothes, ragged, torn, but unmistakably from decades ago. The realization hit them all at once. The woman they had been hearing, whose whispers Amanda had heard calling her name, had never left the house. She had never left because she had never been alive. She was the one who had died in that room, locked away behind the walls. She had been there all along, watching, waiting for someone to find her. Amanda staggered back from the hole, her breath catching in her throat. "Who is she?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But no one had the answer. No one knew who she was or how long she had been there. But one thing was certain. Whatever had been haunting this house, whatever presence had been calling to them from the darkness, had been trapped in time, imprisoned in that very wall for years. And now she was free. The authorities were called to the Holloway house, and the body was carefully removed from the walls. The house, once a place of curiosity and rumors, was sealed off for good. A new family, a new beginning, replaced by a dark chapter of history now buried beneath the weight of time. Yet, something in the town had changed. The whispers of the house, the strange occurrences, the feeling that something was watching, it never truly went away. Though the house stood empty, abandoned once again, the town couldn't shake the unease that clung to it. At night, when the streets were still and the wind carried the scent of pine, people swore they could hear faint sounds. The creak of a door opening, the shuffle of footsteps on the rotting floors. And there were those, like Old Man Jenkins from the diner, who would swear that if you stood in front of the house long enough, you'd hear it. The soft, eerie whisper of a name. Amanda. Amanda. It was said that sometimes, in the dead of night, the lights in the old Holloway house would flicker on, one by one, as if the house itself were alive again, waiting for the next person to uncover its secrets. But no one dared to go near it now, not anymore. Not after what had been uncovered. And as the wind howled outside, some say that if you listen closely enough, you might hear her voice once more, calling from behind the walls, from the darkness. And perhaps, you might even hear your own name. So, what do you think? Was it just an old house with a dark past, or did something truly evil linger there, waiting for the right moment to make itself known? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Maybe you've heard whispers in the dark, or felt something watching you when you were alone. Share your stories with us in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about the Holloway house. And if you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you won't miss the next unsettling story. Stay tuned, because the darkest secrets are often the ones we least expect. But this story isn't over. The truth about the Holloway house is just the beginning. There's a deeper, darker history tied to the land itself, something that goes back further than anyone could have imagined. In the next episode, we'll uncover the twisted past that led to the curse that haunts this town. Who was the woman in the walls, and why was she trapped there for so long? What other secrets are hidden beneath the surface? Stay tuned for the next chilling chapter, but beware, some stories are better left untold.